Good morning or late good morning to everyone. We're going to wait just a couple of minutes to give everyone a chance to log in. So we'll get started in about 2 minutes. All right, so we're going to get started. Hope everybody was able to log in easily and successfully and having a good day so far. And today we're going to be discussing the September 2025 policy update packet, as well as a special packet that we released in August for policies that were impacted by the Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court decision in Mahmoud. Next slide, please. So let's take a little bit of a look at the agenda for today. We're going to start with housekeeping and presenter introductions. Then we're going to move on to a couple of polls. First, kind of a fun practice poll to make sure everyone gets the idea of the polls, and then we'll do a more formal poll. We'll move on to an overview of Gamut and the more practical way of accessing the policies and revisions and all that. Then we'll move on to the heart of our discussion about the policy updates with ample time for questions and answers. We will have another formal poll towards the end, and you can evaluate how we did in the webinar. It will really help us to keep improving. And then the last will be time for some additional questions. Next slide, please. So in terms of the questions and answers, if you could please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and you can see from the ribbon below where that would be. And it's located in the ribbon with the little square around it, and the chat feature has been turned off. Your questions will be answered either in the Q&A feature in writing or live by the presenters. And please know that everyone who's attending will receive a link to the video of the webinar as well as the slide deck, so you don't need to be concerned about that. Next slide, please. So I'm going to now introduce our presenters. We'll start with Kristen Lindgren-Ruzzoni, who's our general counsel, Dustin Bindreiff, who's our senior policy manual writer, Meghan Russell, who is also a senior policy manual writer, Erin O'Ray, who's the manager of technology, sales, and training, Josh Daniels, who's our chief of policy and governance technology services, and myself, Barbara Laifman, and I'm the director of policy manual development. So I just want to give in advance thanks to all of the presenters for presenting today. Next slide, please. So we're going to start with a really fun poll. We thought maybe to do something seasonal about Halloween. So the first poll is, what is your favorite Halloween treat? Is it A, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups? I love the smooth richness. B, M&Ms, they melt in your mouth, not in your hand. Kit Kats, give me a break. D, pumpkin seeds straight from the source. Or E, who cares about Halloween? I'm focused on Thanksgiving. So if we'll take like a minute at the most to submit your responses using your technology, and then we'll take a look at the results. Okay, so why don't we see what the results show? So it looks like Reese's Peanut Butter Cups are pretty far ahead of everything else, then Kit Kats, then to M&Ms, then everyone's more like a bigger group looking forward to Thanksgiving than the pumpkin seeds. So, okay, thanks so much. So why don't we close this poll and we'll move on to our next slide and our next poll, please. Okay, so this poll has two parts and it has to do with composition of attendees, and it helps us be able to accurately and appropriately orient our webinars to who's attending. So the first part is, have you previously attended one or more policy webinars? No, this is my first one. Yes, I previously attended one or two. Or the third, yes, I have previously attended three or more. And then the second part is, what is your role in your district or county office of education? Would that be board member, superintendent, administrator, executive assistant, or other? So we'll take again just about 10 seconds to complete this. Okay, let me take the results. Okay, so it looks like in terms of attendance, that the largest category is people who have previously attended one or two more webinars. So it's great to have the return attendees. And then still a nice amount that it's their first one, 35%. And then quite a substantial too who have attended three or more. So that's great. And what in terms of the roles in the district or county office of education, it looks like most are superintendents or administrators, followed by executive assistants and then board members. Okay, well, thank you so much for participating in those polls. And we will now move forward. So next slide, please. So I'm now going to introduce Erin O'Ray, who is going to talk a little bit more about the implementation of Gamut.
Good morning, everyone. So there are a couple of ways to access Gamut, and those are dependent upon your subscription level. So we've got our Gamut Policy subscriptions and our Gamut Policy Plus subscriptions. We'll walk through both and what it looks like to access depending on which is the case for you, and whether it's a district or a county office of education, because it differs in those ways as well. So this slide here is referring to a Gamut Policy subscription for a district, and you'll log into the Gamut Policy site. You'll see that there's a policies drop-down menu in which you can select policy updates, and then they are listed in chronological order. So on the screen, you'll see the August 2025 update packet. We've got a guide sheet listing and a policies listing, so they're split out according to which you want to review first. And then we've also got the September 2025 for both of those as well. Next slide, please. For our county offices of education who are logging into the Gamut Policy site, your view is going to be a little different, where you can see the county update packets for both of these. So you'll notice that the title for the August and the September 2025 update packets include the word county, but same thing where you're going to use the policies drop-down menu to select policy updates, and you'll be able to review from there. Next slide, please. Now, if you have gone forward with a subscription to Gamut Policy Plus and you're housing your own manual on your own Gamut site and you've got a policies module integrated, you're going to be using the policies drop-down menu in your site as well. But there you'll be selecting CSBA communications, where you can see that there is the the CSBA policy updates. They're also listed in reverse chronological order. We've got the September 2025 policy update release on top, and then August beneath it, and it goes on. The way to select those is to click on CSBA policy updates on the left, and you can click into the title of the update to get to all of the included documents and the copy icon to pull those drafts over. Next slide, please. Now for COEs, it's the same thing. We're going to use the policies drop-down menu to select CSBA communications, but you'll notice on that left-hand menu there, it says County Office of Education Policy Updates, and this is where you're going to be accessing the materials inside the September 2025 County Update and the August 2025 Special County Update. Our district and county updates are released on separate dates. Oftentimes the COE release comes out a few days up to a week after the district release. Next slide, please. So I want to announce that we have our seasonal webinar series starting again. So the Gamut Fall webinar series is returning. We have an installment in October and November, and we had one in September. If you're interested in receiving the recording for that, you can email us at gamut@csba.org, and we'll be happy to send that over. And if you're interested in registering for the October or November webinars, you can visit csba.org/webinars. We also host weekly drop-in sessions every Wednesday at 2 p.m. where our Gamut subscribers can drop in and ask one of our amazing Gamut support team any questions they have on their mind, whether it's troubleshooting or requesting live assistance. We'll be there and you can come in and ask us anything you need. Next slide, please. So if it's come to the point where you're realizing you're a few update packets behind and you want to address those situations, you have a couple of options available to you. We have something called a policy manual review that we offer at CSBA, and we also have a policy development workshop. To explain the difference there, the policy manual review is an audit and it lets you know which policies you may need to update according to the dates that we have updated the CSBA version, comparing it to the date that your organization has last updated that same policy. Our policy team will compare those dates and issue you a report to make it helpful for you. The policy development workshop, on the other hand, is a way to update your entire manual in one fell swoop. And the policy consultants from CSBA will come and work side by side with you to assist you in developing a policy manual tailored to the needs of your organization. Next slide, please. Now, as you know, we offer Gamut Policy Plus, but we also have other modules like meetings. They work together cohesively. So if you're interested in seeing how Gamut Meetings works with Gamut Policy Plus, we would love to show you how well they work together. You can pull in your draft policies and other policies for policy review during board meetings into your agenda in Gamut Meetings. And there's also many other functions that make it easy to streamline your processes in Gamut. So it helps you keep all of your users together in one place, search across your meetings and your policies using the advanced search feature in Gamut, and more. So if you're interested in that, please email us at gamut@csba.org, and we'd love to show you around, give a demonstration, or answer any questions you may have. Next slide, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Erin. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the basics of our sample policies. Next slide, please. So it's always good to kind of review the terms that we're using about our policies, regulations, exhibits, and board bylaws. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what each one is and does. So board policies are the way in which the governing board legislates, and they articulate the policy direction of your district or county office of education. Administrative regulations are the manner in which the superintendent will implement the board policy, and they provide necessary details. They do need to not be inconsistent with applicable board policies. And keep in mind that this structure might be a little bit different for county superintendents due to the differing dynamics between county boards of education and county superintendent of schools. Our exhibits can be very helpful tools which provide forms, notices, and other implementation tools consistent with a particular board policy or regulation to which it relates. And then we have our board bylaws, which are board policies that provide the rules and procedures that the governing board itself must follow. And we, a lot of times will refer to policies, really referring to any of these four documents. So for the matter of this webinar, as well as your communications with CSBA, and maybe even amongst your own boards themselves, sometimes we need to differentiate. Is it the policy, the regulation, the exhibit, or the board bylaw? Sometimes using the inclusive term policies works just as well. Next slide, please. So, to take a little bit about how the manual itself is structured, there's a numbering system which you probably, or most of you are probably familiar with, that ranges from the zeros to the 9,000s. We specifically have a gap at 8,000 just in case in the future we would need to add something. And I'm not going to go through each one because they're on the web, on the slide deck page, but I would like to talk a little bit about the 4,000s because they can get a little confusing. So any that start with 40 and then two other numbers will apply to all three classes of staff: certificated, classified, and managerial or supervisorial. Then we have the 4100s, which are just for certificated staff, the 4200s just for classified, and the 4300s, which are just for managerial or supervisorial staff. Now, sometimes we have policies that are double or triple coded. This means that the different classes of staff, say like for a double coded, it would be, I'm just making up a number, 4100 and 4200, that are identical because they apply exactly to the same to both classes of employees. And we have some that are triple coded. So that would be 4100, 4200, 4300, and they're exactly the same for all three classes of employees. Some we do have that are single, and some we have just for a particular class and not for any of the other classes. So we have many, many policies. There are over 550 code numbers in our policy list. And since many of these have an additional document that accompanies it, it ends up with over 800 sample policy documents in our manual. Next slide, please. So important to keep in mind that the policies are samples and they serve as a starting point for your districts and county offices of education. And it's a really nice time to be able to review them and think of how they can be tailored to meet your districts or county offices of education unique needs and desires, and really to customize them to your specific district or county office. Please know that the policies have gone through extensive legal review, but they do not constitute legal advice, and they may become quickly out of date. We try very, very hard to keep them all up to date. But as you have just seen, we have many, many documents, and sometimes it's just one change in law or one change in from a guidance document. And with that, the policy needs to be changed. And sometimes, we can't get to it immediately. So we try, but it's always important to review the currentness of the policy. Maybe you have seen notes which are embedded in the policies to provide context. And policies, I mean, all of the whole term, meaning policies, regulations, exhibits, and board bylaws. And they are very good at describing new changes as well as just general description of what follows in the document. They're very, very helpful tools, but they should not be included in the adopted version of the policy, although, of course, can be provided. More of the content itself of our policy updates. Again, the September packet, as well as our special Mahmoud policy update packet. Next slide, please. So this is just a general overview of what we're going to be covering in the webinar. We're going to be focusing on policies that are related to attendance, another category of back to school safety, work-based learning, and then the policies that were impacted by the Supreme Court decision in Mahmoud. Next slide, please. There are a few policies that are equally as important, but didn't really fit as well into a general discussion. Just wanted to point them out here. Recovery for property loss or damage, International Baccalaureate Program, and governance standards. So feel free to ask us questions on this if needed, or either now or at any time after the webinar. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to introduce Meghan, who is going to cover the topic of attendance.
Thanks, Barbara. So next slide, please. It's important to keep our policies related to attendance up to date, since school attendance is tied to learning, student success, and as we all know, also tied to funding. And too many student absences threaten the foundation for learning. So it's important to have these policies in place. And absences reduce access to learning opportunities. If your students aren't there to receive education, you can have the best teacher in the world. But if the student isn't there to access learning, then they're not going to succeed and benefit from our education. And attendance is also a key indicator that's correlated with high school graduation. So even in elementary school, attendance is really important. So next slide, please. So one of the policies that was updated in our packet was Board Policy and Administrative Regulation 5113, which is absences and excuses. And the AR was updated to reflect AB 1884. And that removed the requirement that a student's family member be deployed in a combat zone in order for it to be an excused absence. So now if a student is visiting with an immediate family member who is active duty, they can be deployed for non-combat related reasons, and that student would still be able to have an excused absence. And then the AR was also updated to reflect SB 1138, and that adds a student's participation in military entrance processing to the list of excused absences. The AR was also updated to clarify that only one method is listed for verification of student absences is required. And our BP was updated with minor revisions. So next slide, please. We also updated AR 5113.11, which is attendance supervision. And that was updated to reflect SB 153, which authorizes districts and county offices to implement an attendance recovery program. And that can be for students in grades K through 12 to make up lost instructional time and offset absences. And the implementation should be in accordance with board policy and administrative regulation 5113.1, which is chronic absence and truancy. And so that's where the bulk of the information about these attendance recovery programs is located in BP and AR 5113.1, chronic absence and truancy, and that has been previously updated in previous packets. And so we also updated this attendance supervision AR to reflect that districts and COEs are now authorized to implement the attendance recovery program. So they're good to look at these two policies in conjunction if your district is going to implement an attendance recovery program. And then there's no board policy for this. There's only an AR for 5113.11. Next slide, please. We also updated board policy and administrative regulation 5113.12, and that's district school attendance and review boards, and those we commonly refer to as SARBs. So the BP was updated to reflect AB 1939, and that requires a district and a COE SARB to at least annually consult with students who reflect the diversity of the schools that are served by the SARB in order to solicit input that will assist the SARB in gaining a better understanding of and proposing interventions for student attendance and behavioral challenges. And then the BP was also updated to clarify that the SARB is required to operate in accordance with specified board bylaws and state laws. And that's for both the COE if it operates a SARB and the district SARB. And if a district operates a SARB, they're also required to operate in accordance with the COE's SARB rules if the COE has a SARB. Additionally, the AR was updated to clarify that SARB meetings that consider matters related to individual students be held in closed session in accordance with Board Bylaw 9321, which is dealing with closed sessions. Next slide, please. So those are the 3 policies that we have updated with this packet relating to attendance. And if anybody has any questions, now is a great time for that.
Yeah, so we have one question so far, and the question is for SP 153, do attendance recovery programs also allow us to recoup the lost ADA funding? Yeah, so to my knowledge, there are, the law does allow this to some extent. It can differ depending on the type of school. So it's something that would need to be looked at carefully with possibly your legal counsel, but maybe just to look at the law more closely. If you need help from us, we can take a look at those details. But yes, I do believe funding can be recouped. But like I said, I believe it differs, and the way it differs can depend on the type of school it is.
Yeah.
So hope that's helpful enough. Megan, did you
Yeah,
want to
thanks,
add?
Barbara. That was great. I would just add that it's helpful to look at AR 5113.1, which is the policy on chronic absence and truancy. And that's where most of the information about these programs is, including the notes about this program. And it's going to reference Education Code 46211. That's the law that has a lot of the details about these programs in it. And I just wanted to also note that that students may generate ADA for the school year in which the program is operated. But like Barbara said, to consult your legal counsel and your policies as well.
Yeah, yeah. I know there's new legislation. I can't cite the bill right now, which like that, your very thorough explanation has changed a little bit by the type of school. But that's very good background information, and I think enough for everyone to go forward. So thank you so much. And thanks, Megan, for the presentation. I don't see, oh, wait, no, we are getting another question. For BP 5113, does this mean that if a student's parent came back from a deployment, they get time off, or if the parent is home mid-deployment? If so, how long? And should they do short-term independent study?
So again, I would recommend that you consult with legal counsel over this, but I would think that if they are deployed and if they're home on leave, that they would be eligible for this, since it doesn't have to be in a combat related zone. And I think the districts might vary on what they choose for a short-term independent study. So I would consult your own policies and procedures as well for the short-term independent study.
I would just add that 5113 has to do with absences. So this is about whether if a student is absent, whether or not it is excused. If they were doing short-term independent study, then it wouldn't necessarily be an absence because they would be getting instruction.
Thank you, Will. Okay, I don't see any other questions coming in for this topic. So thank you, Megan, for the presentation and being available for the questions. And now we will move on to back to school safety. And I'd like to introduce Dustin to cover this topic.
Thanks, Barbara. So in September, another theme was updates to a number of safety-related policies. We updated the 5 policies you see here. In addition to in June, we did the comprehensive school safety plan, which continues to be a growing document and an important document for schools in terms of safety planning. Next slide, please. Some foundational considerations, I'm sure you guys know as educators and board members, is safety remains a primary focus. And we see that regular legislation coming along addressing safety in its many forms, whether that's environmental safety, mental health, or physical safety. Also ensuring a couple major things with the rate of change in safety policies, ensuring alignment, coherence, and compliance with safety-related laws requires consistent monitoring and regular updates. As you'll see here, many of these policies, safety policies, are getting updated annually or every couple of years. And then, of course, implementation of those policies becomes a important next step, and ensuring effective communication to all staff impacted by the new safety policies and providing them training as necessary. The updates policies we'll go over in detail here. For September, focus primarily on physical safety and school buildings. Next slide, please. The first one we wanted to touch on was campus security, BP and AR 3515. We added to the board document, we wanted to reflect the Department of Homeland Security's behavioral threat assessment and management of practice. This guide offers some best practice and recommended practices when assessing behavioral threats of students. In the administrative regulation, we added some language to emphasize that campus security plans be developed for each school site. And we added language related to AB 2565, which requires districts that undertake alterations or construction of a school building to install interior locks on the door of any room. As we go through these, you'll see the common theme in safety related legislation is the growing emphasis on schools having a plan for different dangerous situations that can arise or different safety related issues. A couple of things we added here that we touched on in the references was AB 2715, which authorizes the board to have closed session meetings with law enforcement for safety related issues, and AB 1858, which requires districts to comply with specific requirements of a safety plan if they are having procedures to prepare for active shooters. Next slide, please. A couple important updates to fire drills and fires. First, we added the requirement that the first emergency evacuation drill of each school year has to be conducted within the first 10 days of classes. Next, we added AB 296H, which again has this requirement to develop procedures to identify appropriate refuge shelters for students and staff in the event of an evacuation by local authorities and notification to the fire department or other authorities. A part of these notifications is the requirement they shall be coordinated with the fire department and other authorities, and that there is a communication and evacuation plan developed which can be used in the event of an early notice evacuation warning. Next slide, please. Next, we updated BPAR 5141. This focuses on healthcare and emergencies. The first thing we did in the BP and the AR was updated some language related to AED devices, and that those are authorized to be used at school sites and the requirements around those. Additionally, we added language related to the requirements related to trauma kits. The important thing regarding trauma kits, again, this similar theme, is any school district with more than 200 students is required to acquire, place, and maintain 2 trauma kits, and to inform school employees where those are and provide training as necessary. Next slide, please. BP and AR 5141.4, a couple of important updates related to child abuse prevention and reporting. In particular, in the AR, we wanted to clarify that general neglect does not include a parent or guardian's economic disadvantage or a child receiving treatment by spiritual means or not receiving specified medical treatment for religious reasons. So those are important distinctions in making those decisions. Next, we added language related to AB 1913, which requires districts and COEs to provide employee training on prevention and abuse. the important thing here is this training now has to be provided annually rather than once every 3 years. And finally, then some BP was updated in conjunction with some minor revision. Lastly, next slide, please. BP 51412, safety. Here we did some reorganization, moved some of the language out of the BP regarding student ID cards and moved that into the AR. We updated the language regarding the release of a student when a custodial parent or guardian cannot be reached, and added language in the AR to SB 1063, updating information about student identification cards. Finally, we added in the notes an important resource for many districts, the California's Protecting Californians from Extreme Heat. This is the state's action plan to build community resilience with the dangers related to the dangers of extreme heat. Next slide, please.
Okay, so thank you, Dustin. We can now look at what questions we have from the discussion about school safety. So the first question is, can you define trauma kit and what should that include?
I might see if Megan has further answers. She did the revisions to that. But a trauma kit is related to first aid equipment for in case of physical dangers. Did I summarize that okay, Megan, or do you want to add
Yeah.
more?
Yeah, no, that's great. The requirements are found in Health and Safety Code 19310. And that has the specifics of what it should contain as well. And then also it's important to make sure that's restocked with the required materials and supplies and equipment as well.
Okay, thank you. The next question on this topic is AB 3516.1, and that's the fire drills and fires. Regarding the requirement to conduct fire drill within the first 10 days, is that calendar days or school days? And I'm actually not sure, Dustin. I'm not sure if you have more specifics. I do know that it needs to be within 10 days of the beginning of classes, and it's covered by the building code section 24 CCR 403.4.2. But I'm not sure that that section clarifies if it's school days or calendar days. So might need to check with your legal counsel regarding that. Dustin, did you have anything to add?
The same. I think the code you cited doesn't specify days. I would suspect it's school days, but you may want to reach out and get further clarification from your counsel.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I don't see any other questions related to back to school safety. So thanks so much, Dustin, for the presentation, and we'll move on to the topic of work-based learning and for Megan to present.
Thanks, Barbara. So we're talking about two policies here. So next slide. And of course, it's important to talk about work-based learning because it's important to link classroom learning with real-world experiences in order to improve student educational outcomes. And to support student workforce preparedness through work-based learning opportunities. And of course, these can be accomplished through a variety of learning opportunities, such as career technical education or work education experience. And also to ensure that for our students who are working while also attending school, that their rights are protected. So next slide, please. So we updated board policy and administrative regulation 5113.2, which is dealing with work permits. And the AR was updated to reflect the requirement that the superintendent or designee before or at the time of signing a student's work permit issue the student a document clearly explaining their basic labor rights extended to workers. And I wanted to point out that CDE has a basic labor rights information sheet template that is available on its website. So that's something that your district could go to the CDE website and print that out and then distribute that to students when they are seeking a work permit. And that bill, which was passed in 2023, it's AB 800. Part of that bill was to explain these basic labor rights to students. And part of it is also to observe Workplace Readiness Week. And we'll talk a little bit about that when I talk about the next policy that we updated. But I also wanted to point out that this policy was also updated to clarify that the principal or designee is required to submit a self-certification to the superintendent that the principal or the designee understands the requirements in existing law for issuing those work permits. And to clarify that copies of work permits should be retained in accordance with Administrative Regulation 3580, which deals with district records. And we did update the board policy in conjunction with this AR with minor revisions. Next slide, please. So we also updated board policy and administrative regulation 6178.1, which is work-based learning. And we updated the board policy to reflect AB 2179, and that requires at the beginning of the first semester or quarter that the superintendent or designee notifies parents and guardians of students in grades 11 and 12 about local apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs. And we've also clarified that the district and county office is authorized to host locally focused apprenticeship or career technical education fair events. So in addition to if your district or COE offers college fair events, they can also authorize to host these apprenticeship and career CTE fair events as well. And then the BP was also updated to reflect the requirement that the district or the COE annually observe Workplace Readiness Week. And that is for districts that serve students in grades 9 through 12 and COEs. And more information about observing the Workplace Readiness Week can be found in Board Policy 6142.94, which is about history, social sciences instruction. And so all public high schools are required to observe that week of April 28th as Workplace Readiness Week. And then we also updated the BP to align language with other policies and law. Next slide, please. And the AR was updated to clarify that work experience education teacher coordinator responsibilities include preparing individual training plans and observing students and consulting with students as well. And the eligibility requirements for participation in cooperative CTE programs. And then also updated to clarify the requirements for formal related vocational classroom instruction for both the cooperative CTE program and for community classrooms. Next slide, please. So that's all I have on work permits and work-based learning.
Thanks so much, Megan. It looks like we just have one question, and it is that students don't always have IDs, especially special needs kids who tend to lose them more easily. And what do they do for these students who don't have their ID?
I feel like maybe this was related to
That's, yes,
5142. Is that
that's what
maybe
I'm
what?
wondering also, if it was related to the back to school safety. Yeah.
Does that sound right to you, Megan, or did you have some thoughts?
I would say I don't think that necessarily applies to these two policies we just discussed.
Okay. I guess I can tell you the education code we cited in 5142, the administrative regulation. The requirement says that districts that issue student identification cards, they have to have certain numbers printed on them. I don't know that there is a mandate that all students have an identification card or there is a mandate what the district would do if a student loses their ID cards. Does that
Yeah, I
make sense,
agree.
Barbara? Or so
Yes,
there,
yes, yeah. And again, probably good to check with legal counsel, but I agree with Dustin that it's not a requirement, and I don't know that it's a requirement to replace the card if a student loses it. So probably good to check with legal counsel um, to verify, but I think Dustin's answer is accurate. All right, thanks so much, Dustin and Megan. And next slide, please. Okay, now we've got to the topic of the US Supreme Court case of Mahmoud versus Taylor. And I'm going to hand it over to Josh and to Kristen to present on this topic.
All right, thank you, Barbara. As we get to in a minute, Mahmoud v. Taylor was a Supreme Court decision, and we issued a special packet in August that updated the 3 policies on your screen. Some of you may have remembered it was decided in June, and it held that the First Amendment, it was about a district in Maryland, and it held that the First Amendment basically prohibited this school district um, from including certain LGBTQ plus storybooks as part of elementary school instruction if they didn't provide parents with notice and the ability to opt out of that instructional content. So it was specific to parents, not parents and guardians. It was specific to these storybooks, and it was specific to the elementary school instruction. That was the facts of the case. And they held that the First Amendment required basically notice and the ability to opt out on the grounds that the storybooks, quote, substantially interfered with the religious development of the children of these parents. As we'll talk about, the holding really focused on the question of whether the particular instructional content interfered with this religious development, and noted that it will always be fact intensive. And therefore, it is sort of unclear to what extent the holding applies to other instructional content. It might apply very broadly. It might apply very narrowly. If you talk to your counsel, you might get a particular opinion. If you talk to another counsel, you might get another opinion. It was not made very clear in the Supreme Court case. And because there hasn't been any follow-up decisions that have been published about it, it still is unclear. So now I'm going to turn over to Kristen to talk more about the holding in the case.
Yeah, so Josh is correct that the decision is somewhat vague and doesn't necessarily provide the full scope, I think, of what the court could have meant. But the most clear paragraph that gives us the best evidence of what the court would expect from an LEA to address these opt-out requirements is in this paragraph that Josh has helpfully quoted in almost its entirety here on the screen. We wanted to make sure that we provided this particular quote from the decision because it does inform how we have set up the policy to try to be as much in line with the decision as possible. So you'll see, as Josh just said, the decision says that the question of whether something substantially interferes with the religious development of a child is always fact intensive, which is hard for you all because it means you've got to ask your lawyer every time a new thing comes up, right? And have them apply the facts to the law. We don't have a broad black letter rule that you can just follow in every case. But it does provide some guidance as far as it will depend on the specific religious beliefs and practices asserted and the specific nature of the educational requirement or curricular feature at issue. And then it gives an example that certain things targeted towards very young children may be analyzed differently from high school students who are more sophisticated, maybe have a better ability to, parse the information because they're older. We have seen that in the past with respect to other types of religious freedom issues on the other side, which is that the Supreme Court has looked at, how coercive something might be to a student, and it's often more coercive towards a young child than an older child. And I think that is kind of the analysis that they're using here. And then a court, when reviewing whether a parent has the right to opt out, must also consider the specific context in which the materials are presented. And you'll see this language around, is it hostile to religious viewpoints or providing a pressure to conform, or is it just neutrally presented? It's a little unclear whether what the court means or thinks a neutrally presented topic would be. It seems to kind of give the parents the right to determine whether the issue is hostile to religious, or the curriculum is hostile to religious viewpoints or imposes a pressure to conform. And so you'll see the way that we've set up the policy is to have parents provide that information, so that the district can, or county office can make a determination whether the opt-out needs to be honored or not. Next slide, please. So again, work with your legal counsel to determine the scope of this. As Josh noted, it could apply to other things. This case was focused on some books relating to LGBTQ plus issues, but it could apply more broadly. And as Josh noted, reasonable folks can differ on that, and do. So work with your legal counsel to determine the scope. You can allow more opt-outs than are required, but keep in mind that this doesn't allow you necessarily to change curriculum if the California state law requires you to have curriculum. So this is just about allowing opt-outs, and it might feel easier to administratively just stop using certain curriculum to avoid the opt-outs. Make sure you're aware of what is required to be in the curriculum so that you're not violating state law. And that's where, this is a really great time to work with your legal counsel to make sure that you are following all the different rules that are set out for you that sometimes can be overlapping. And then you should provide a means for parents and guardians to review instructional content within the scope that you determine is appropriate with your legal counsel. And be aware that parents and guardians already have the right to examine certain instructional materials. So we've got a couple examples here. So Education Code 49091.10 provides broad rights for parents to be able to inspect curricular materials and supplementary materials. So you should be following those. Those are in your policies, and parents have long had those rights. There also is the Federal Protection of People Rights Act, which is, I believe, from 2021. It has some similar requirements. It's a little bit more narrow, and it's targeted specifically at a particular issue of students being surveyed about their beliefs, but it does provide some requirements to allow parents to inspect curriculum. So those already exist in the law prior to Mahmoud, and should assist in making sure that parents can inspect information and then decide whether they want to opt their children out or not. And then I'll turn it back over to Josh.
Sorry, I didn't
Josh?
realize I was unmuted.
Yeah,
I
let me
apologize.
see.
I'm back. So, this is about Mahmoud, of course. The special release was about Mahmoud, but it's important to remember, as sort of Kristen was alluding to, there are other things that sort of interface or interrelate with this topic that we want to make sure everyone recalls or is at least aware of. So there are already some opt-outs and notice requirements for certain instruction, for parents and guardians and students. Um, so we've just sort of noted, so some of those opt-outs are based on religious belief. So Education Code 51240 allows on a religious basis opt-out of any health instruction. Then there are other bases, which in a different code and different topic, right, that is not religious based at all. Just you can opt out, period. You don't need to state anything. It doesn't need to be based on a religious belief. And then the other piece is that in at least one of those instances, LEAs must provide an alternate educational activity and can't discipline students or otherwise sort of sanction or penalize them for opting out. So that might mean, failing a test or something like that, right? That would be a consequence, a penalty for that opt-out, and that you must give them something else to do that is educational in nature. And as Kristen also alluded to, LEAs are required to teach certain instructional content. Now, that is separate than potentially whether a court would hold that you must be able to opt out of that content. But LEAs under California law are required to teach certain content. So it's sort of a multitude of requirements and prohibitions and things of that nature that is definitely not easy to navigate. So as we've been mentioning, definitely make sure you're in touch with your legal counsel about it, but we want to make sure we give you sort of the key parameters and the key concerns, as you work through this. Oops, I jumped too far ahead. Okay. All right. So what did we put in these three policies? So, we did our best to interpret Mahmoud, given that it is not clear exactly how it would be applied on the ground. Some of these, what you're going to see is based upon existing opt-out practice in state law. And some of it is just what we think sort of makes sense based upon the language of the opinion. So any opt-out request should be in writing. That's just good practice. If you take it verbally, you don't know what was actually said. There's no record of it. So in writing. And then based upon that paragraph that we quoted a few slides ago, the policy we've updated says that we want the specific instructional content of which the student should be opted out. So not just in general, I want to be opted out of X, but like specifically within that, what do you want to be opted out of? What is the religious belief, custom, or practice that creates that substantial interference or conflict? And then say more about how it substantially interferes. So in the context of Mahmoud, right, they specifically cited the storybook and the content within the storybook, which is that the individuals presented as sort of the court talks about sort of pressure to conform, sort of that this is normal and okay, and that sort of normativity pressure or sort of assumption interferes with the religious beliefs of those parents about who can get married, who should start a family, etc. So the other thing is that the particular language in Mahmoud only references parents. In our policies, we've extended it to parents and guardians because we just think that is sort of always the case. And then even though Mahmoud doesn't talk about it, there already is some, as I mentioned in the prior slide, requirement to provide an alternative educational activity and to prohibit any sort of disciplinary action or sanction. So we've extended that to any sort of opt-out. We think I would be surprised if a court said, yep, students can opt out under Mahmoud. You must give them notice, but you don't need to actually provide them with an alternative activity, and you can discipline them or sanction them because of that opt-out. That just doesn't seem consistent with the general sort of vibe of the opinion. So these are the three policies again. The first one, 6141.2, recognition of religious beliefs and customs, is the one that's going to contain the most specific policy language, but the other two policies will reference, and we have made some changes. We want to note that 6144, controversial issues, already includes generic opt-out language, quote, when required by law. So there was not a need immediately to make changes to that one. And then we do think that 5020, parent rights and responsibilities, does need to be updated in light of Mahmoud. That is forthcoming. There may be some others, but these three at the top are the main ones that made sense, at least the most immediately in light of Mahmoud. So as we always do when we update policies, we update them not just for a particular purpose, but really any update from other laws that might influence a policy, we incorporate. So for example, AR 6142.1, we updated it to reflect AB 229 as it relates to menstrual health. Then there's AB 2050, which talks about including other parts of instruction and about adolescent relationship abuse and other things of that nature in the hotline. We then moved a section from the AR to the BP because it felt better. And then similarly, the AB 2429 on AR 6142.8 about the dangers of fentanyl use. So just even though we're focusing on Mahmoud, we have updated the policies in the special packet for other reasons as well as is our normal practice. Okay, there are a lot of questions.
Yes, lots of questions. So I'm not sure how we're going to do this, and I don't know yet how many repeat. Let's go through and we'll see if we need to put a stop on them or if we'll hold over the end questions. We'll figure out what to do. So let's get started. Do we think Mahmoud can be applied to other topics besides LGBTQIA if parents claim religious interference?
Potentially, I think that's one of the questions that's very challenging because the court doesn't make that clear. Some people will say definitely, and some people will say, well, it's fact specific, and so you really can't say until you work out the facts. So it is an unknown.
Okay, next question, which is very brief. It says, is that in class or library? So I'm assuming they're asking if the holding applies to just curriculum or library
Yeah,
materials
so
too.
the facts of Mahmoud were about required instruction in class. It has not yet been extended to libraries. That's not to say that it might not be. And there are other cases out there about sort of what content can be included and not included in libraries. But for right now, Mahmoud is just about instruction in class.
Okay, what if we do an opt-in instead of an opt-out?
So generally, there are many instances where opt-ins are prohibited by state law, so be very careful about that. And also recall what Kristen said, which is that some content is required. And so if you allow an opt-in versus an opt-out, that might run afoul of that requirement. And in general, students are required to come to school and required to be in class. And so I would say that talk to your counsel, but I would approach opt-ins very cautiously, at least under the current legal structure.
Okay, next, do we send opt-out notification to elementary school only? I'm sorry, do we only send opt-out notification to elementary school students? And can we avoid sending to 6 to 8 families?
I would talk to your counsel. This goes to scope, and this is the sort of the foundational piece of how you approach this in practice. I don't know, Kristen, if you want to add anything to that, but I think
I mean,
this is yeah.
we can't give legal advice here, but my sense is that even though Alito in the decision called out the fact that high school students may be treated differently, does not mean that they are necessarily exempt from the right to opt out or their parents are. I think that's very unlikely that this particular court agrees with that. So I would be careful and very much consult with your legal counsel before deciding that there are certain grade levels you do not want to send the notice to.
Okay, thank you. That pretty much covers, I believe, the second part of that question about applicability to different rates. So I think we covered that. Is the LEA obligated to honor a parent opt-out request for a student who is 18 years old?
The case doesn't
Go ahead, Kristen.
address adult students. In fact, some of the commentary around the case has been interesting because the case doesn't address students at all, really, as far as who's making the call. It's all about the rights of the parents and the parents' ability to direct their children's upbringing. So we don't have a lot of information here, and I think it just goes back to Josh's comment about checking with your legal counsel about scope. The child being 18 and making their own decisions is going to be part of that fact-intensive determination. That's a really good question, and I wish I had a bright line answer for you.
All right, next question. How does this impact health curriculum that has LGBTQ topics?
So, in particular, health curriculum is going to be a tricky one. Of course, there's Mahmoud, which is the law of the land. There is a state opt-out for, as I mentioned earlier, but then there is a carve-out to the state opt-out, which basically says if it's not about health specifically, right, then you can't opt out just because it's an LGBTQ topic. So, I wish we could give a more precise answer. But this particular one, the intersection of health, LGBTQ, is going to be complicated because of just the intersection of all of that.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Can you explain whether students can opt out of things like representation of LGBTQIA in history, English novels, etc.? We see it as aligning with the FAIR Act, but are curious about your thinking.
So this goes a little bit to what Kristen referenced before. If a court were to view something as just presenting facts, and history without sort of imposing beliefs, then I don't believe that Mahmoud would say you have a right to opt out. It's not imposing any beliefs, it's just history, and so therefore, sort of by definition, it's not going to be interfering with religious development. On the other hand, if a court would review or would see something that's presented as sort of pressure to conform, that quote that we cited before, then I think that, again, fact specific, but I think there's a good chance that a court might say, okay, you can opt out. So it is, and the FAIR Act, as I would say it's intended to be presented, is just to present accurate history. Others might not agree with that, but whether or not that's actually how it's done in practice, right, at a particular school or school district, that's gonna get complicated. Um, so I think this is another one that's really sort of a TBD, depending on how it plays out in the courts. Kristen, you want to
Yeah,
correct or
so
add
I would
anything to
just
what I said?
note that to the extent that state law is in conflict with the Supreme Court decision, the Supreme Court decision is going to be the controlling law. So if the determination is made that there's a right to opt out, the state law wouldn't prohibit that opt out from being exercised because the Supreme Court decision controls. So if the question is, can we both allow these opt-outs and meet our obligations under the FAIR Act, the answer is yes. The state can't make you do something that the Supreme Court has determined is unconstitutional. You just have to make sure that you are teaching the material, and that's what the FAIR Act requires. I think that we want kids to learn as much of the curriculum as possible. So we don't want to just be granting these opt-outs for any possible reason. But at the same time, I just would keep in mind that opt-outs are in alignment with the FAIR Act to the extent that the Supreme Court decision obligates you to opt a student out.
Okay, thank you. So this next question, I believe, is just really asking about the applicability to assessments, especially because teachers don't want to give access to their tests and quizzes, as well as what's entailed in supplemental instructional material used by a teacher to enhance the instruction. So I think the question is how does the holding apply to assessments as well as supplemental instructional material?
I think it has to do with under state law. Oh, I see. I see. I see. Um, yeah, so it wouldn't necessarily require that you turn over an assessment, a quiz, a test necessarily. But it would, because you're going to be testing on content that you teach. So let's assume that we believe that whatever this instructional content is, that is within the scope of Mahmoud. Let's just take that as a given. Then even though the actual assessment document wouldn't necessarily be required to be turned over, right? A summary or enough information about the instructional content would need to be given to the parents and guardians so that they can make an accurate determination about whether or not the content substantially interferes with the religious upbringing of a child. So it may be easiest to give them, a copy of the textbook or the handouts or whatever. You wouldn't necessarily be required to turn over the assessment of the quiz.
Okay, let's take maybe like one or two more, I believe, because otherwise we're gonna get pushed. We only have about 5 to 6 minutes left in the webinar. So here are a few questions regarding notice. And after I ask, I'm going to see if we've covered them all. Since the court stressed that everything is fact intensive, how much notice is required? Is a general annual notice sufficient, or does Mahmoud push us toward lesson specific notices? And as well as,
I
can we
did.
give it only, why don't we cover these all at once? I'm reading them. Can we give notification only to families who have submitted an opt-out form? Or does the notification need to go to all students? So I think that can kind of be answered together.
So I think though there's going to be different approaches to the requirements for notice. Does do is it, hey, I'm a parent guardian. I want you to tell me because I have some concerns and therefore sort of I sort of sign up for notices. Is it an annual notice? Mahmoud itself didn't get into that. Um, so I think that will sort of be flushed out. This also goes to scope, right? So what are you noticing? Um, I wish we could offer more, specific policy guidance, but it just is not clear at this point. Kristen, you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately I think that we'll have to see some litigation, but I think that it is probably impossible for an LEA to go through and pick out everything that they think might potentially be um, folded into the opt-outs and Mahmoud. So I think a general notice is probably the best you can do at this point and let parents inspect the materials and make their determinations. But be aware that there could come a time where a court holds that you actually have to provide notice of certain things. The problem is that we don't know the scope. And so while we could probably say if you're going to use storybooks about LGBT characters, that's likely going to be triggering this. That's the only thing that we have for sure at this point.
Okay, let's do one more and then I think we better move on. We'll try to handle the other questions maybe in writing. Unless Josh, you have other
No, I mean
idea.
we have there are a bunch more, some of which I think we've answered, some of which we haven't.
Yeah.
If you have questions, shoot us an email at policy@csba.org. And we're happy to do our best to respond to them. Hopefully we've been able to, give you the gist of some of the parameters of the impact. But let's just do one more, Barbara, and then we want to
Yeah, that's what I
respect folks'
figured because it
time and
covers,
we'll need
yes,
to move on.
Okay. So this has to do with opt-outs. If a parent submits an opt-out request that doesn't fully explain how the content interferes with religious development, can the district reject it or must we go back to the parents for clarification? The next question is very similar. How specific? Yeah, and specific
Yeah.
impact on the curriculum to the religion.
So, those three bullets that we put in the slide, those come from that paragraph that we quoted. That was sort of the best assessment of what a district county office LEA should be asking for. Because remember, yes, you have pressure in some sense from two sides. So you have the Mahmoud, which of course, as Kristen mentions, is going to trump everything else. Um, and that is sort of pushing you towards notice and granting the opt-outs. But on the other hand, right, like you're not allowed. Let's just putting Mahmoud aside, right? If a student shows up and says, actually, I don't feel like coming to school today. I don't really want to learn this stuff. That's an absence, right? And you lose ADA for it, right? They're not in attendance, and so you need to be careful that you don't over grant on opt-outs because that could affect your attendance, right? You could see the state, which obviously philosophically is opposed to what the court is doing, right? Coming in and saying, hey, like, we're going to look at how many opt-outs, and if you don't actually have a paper trail or documentation, we're going to assume that there actually wasn't a basis for the student to be excused, and they're going to ding you. So I think you have to be cautious not to sort of swing the pendulum too far in the other direction because of that possibility. The lack of scope and the lack of additional detail really puts LEAs in a tough spot in terms of really knowing how to implement this.
Okay, thanks. So let's move on with our presentation. And I think any remaining questions on Mahmoud or anything else we discussed or any other policy questions in general will need to be through our email, like Josh had explained. So next slide, please. Okay, almost time for questions, but I think we have taken up our time. So I think, like I said, we might have to do those in writing. Next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted to give everyone a reminder that our quarterly policy changes, updates will be shifting to a new schedule starting with our next packet in November. And then we are going to be on to our new schedule, which is November, February, May, and August. And this change was based on user feedback and to better align with the school year calendar. Next slide, please. And our last poll for the day, if you could please rate the webinar so that we can keep trying to do better. So the poll would be 5 incredible, 4 really helpful, 3 good enough, 2 barely okay, 1 not worth my time. And we'll just wait about 10 seconds. Okay, and then let's see the results. Okay, so pretty good. We have a lot of incredibles and really helpful. Good enough, and then a couple barely okay, 3 barely okay, and 1 not worth my time. So we're going to have to keep working harder to get everything up to hopefully really helpful or incredible. Okay, next slide, please.
And I'll just mention that if you're comfortable sharing feedback, we're not going to come after you. If this wasn't worth your time or barely okay or even good enough, right? Like, let us know if there is something that we can do differently in the future. We definitely welcome it. And Barbara, I know we're at 2:15. So before we let everyone go, there's one question I wanna get to.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there's a bunch that we're not, but
I
there's a
know.
question about, are boards legally required to follow BPs and ARs, or are they just considered guidance? So uh, and I think I'll explain that to districts and county offices. So a board policy is the rule for the district. And so board and staff are required to follow it. With an AR, right, an AR is a regulation. So unless the board adopts ARs, they're going to be adopted by the superintendent, and the superintendent cannot constrain the board. So there's a little bit of a nuance there with the ARs, but board policy, it is the rule of the district. The SUP has to follow it. The staff, the board itself, right? Board bylaws constrain the board. So those are that is what you're required to follow. It's not just a suggestion or guidance.
Okay, thanks so much, Josh. And then I'd like to just thank all of you for coming. We are going to share again the email policy@csba.org in case anybody wants to email us with questions, especially questions we didn't get to, but feel free for any questions that you may have regarding policy. And just thank you so much. I hope you found it worthwhile for the most part and that you enjoy the rest of your day.